Welcome to History Uncovered, where the past comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let's dive into history together. In the early 19th century, the United States was a young nation full of energy, ambition, and contradictions. The people living at that time were incredibly diverse. In the East, farmers, merchants, lawyers, and politicians. In the South, plantation owners, slaveholders, poor white farmers, and millions of enslaved Africans, stripped of freedom, but not of dignity. In the West, hunters, settlers, dreamers, ready to leave everything behind for a new life. Among native peoples, warriors, shamans, mothers, children, all trying to preserve their land, their culture, their spirit. When the U.S. purchased Louisiana from France in 1803, it was like opening a door to the unknown. People from the East Coast began moving westward in search of land, freedom, and prosperity. They built homes, planted corn, hunted, but in doing so, they displaced native tribes, destroyed villages, signed treaties they later broke. It was a time of growth, but also a time of injustice. The War of 1812 with Britain was driven by a sense of humiliation. British ships were stopping American vessels, seizing sailors, interfering with trade. In Congress, especially among the war hawks, young, fiery politicians like Henry Clay, there were calls for war. Ordinary farmers and soldiers stepped up to defend their country. The war was brutal, but it showed that America was ready to stand its ground. Even when the British burned Washington, Americans did not break. And when General Andrew Jackson crushed the British at the Battle of New Orleans, he became a national hero. But behind military victories lay internal conflicts. Slavery was a wound that refused to heal. When Missouri applied for statehood, the question arose, would it be a slave state? The North opposed it. The South supported it. In 1820, a compromise was reached. Missouri would allow slavery, Maine would be free, and a line was drawn to divide future territories. It was a temporary peace, but everyone knew the problem remained unresolved. Meanwhile, the South's wealth grew, built on the labor of enslaved people, on cotton plantations. Thousands were bought, punished, and torn from their families. But they were not merely victims. They sang songs full of pain and hope. They preserved traditions, escaped, resisted. There were figures like Harriet Tubman, who would later become a symbol of defiance. There were preachers who spoke of freedom. There were white abolitionists who wrote books, held rallies, and risked their lives. In the 1840s, America expanded again. People believed the country had a manifest destiny to occupy the entire continent. It was an idea that inspired and blinded. The war with Mexico began after the annexation of Texas. American soldiers, many of them poor young men, marched south, fought, and died. Meanwhile, politicians in Washington debated what should be done with the new lands. Would slavery be allowed there? Mexicans, having lost half their country, felt bitterness and humiliation. After the war, the U.S. gained vast territories: California, Arizona, New Mexico. People flooded in: gold seekers, farmers, adventurers. In California, the gold rush began. People walked, rode wagons, sailed ships. They searched for wealth, but often found death, disease, and disappointment. Native peoples once again lost their lands and lives. In the 1850s, tensions between North and South became unbearable. The Fugitive Slave Act was passed. Now, even in the North, people could be captured and returned to slavery. This sparked outrage. People began helping escapees, creating the Underground Railroad. In Kansas, a real war broke out between pro- and anti-slavery forces. Newspapers reported atrocities, politicians shouted, and the country began to crack. At this time, the book Uncle Tom's Cabin was published. Millions read it. It revealed the suffering of enslaved people, and many began to ask, can we live in a country where some people own others? The South hated the book. The North wept over it. By the late 1850s, America stood on the edge. People could no longer compromise. Each state, each individual had to choose freedom or slavery, unity or secession. It was an era when history was written not only in offices, but in hearts. And all of it was the prelude to a great tragedy that would begin in 1861. America, at that time, was like a house where two brothers lived under one roof, each despising the other's way of life. In the North, factories, railroads, newspapers, schools. People believed in progress, hard work, and personal freedom. Many opposed slavery, though not all were willing to fight for its end. Some simply wanted the country to grow without upheaval. In the South, plantations, tobacco, cotton, wealth built on enslaved labor. Slavery was not just an economy, it was a culture, a way of life, a system of power. White planters saw themselves as aristocrats and enslaved people as property. Not all Southerners were wealthy. Poor white farmers also suffered, but often supported slavery because it gave them a sense of superiority. And the enslaved. They lived in conditions that can hardly be called life. They were sold like livestock. Their families were torn apart. They were punished for the slightest defiance. But they sang songs full of pain and hope. They prayed, they fled, they fought. There were people like Frederick Douglass, a former slave who became a brilliant speaker and writer. He said, "You speak of liberty, but I am not free. You speak of justice, but I do not see it." In Washington, politicians tried to hold the country together. The Compromise of 1850 gave California free state status, but strengthened the Fugitive Slave Act. This meant that even in the North, slave catchers could invade homes and drag people away. Many Northerners were shocked. Protests erupted. People began helping fugitives, creating secret routes, the Underground Railroad. These were ordinary farmers, ministers, women who risked everything to save others. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, allowing new territories to decide for themselves whether to permit slavery. This led to bloody clashes. In Kansas, a miniature civil war broke out. People fought, burned homes, killed each other. Newspapers called it Bleeding Kansas. It was a signal. Compromises no longer worked. Around this time, a man named John Brown emerged. He was a radical opponent of slavery. He believed only blood could cleanse the nation. In 1859, he and a group of followers seized the arsenal at Harper's Ferry, hoping to spark a slave uprising. He was captured, tried, and hanged. To the south, he was a terrorist. To the north, a martyr. His final note read, "I am convinced that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood." Then in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected, a man opposed to the expansion of slavery. He did not promise immediate emancipation, but the South saw his victory as a threat. One by one, Southern states began to secede. People in the North were stunned. People in the South were resolute. America had split. This was the moment when history stopped being politics and became personal. Every person had to choose a side. Brothers found themselves on opposite fronts. Friends became enemies. And all of it because of the question, can one part of a country own another? From 1800 to 1860, America journeyed from a young republic to a nation on the brink of internal catastrophe. These were years of rapid expansion when people moved west, built cities, searched for gold, dreamed of freedom and prosperity. But with that growth came contradictions that could not be masked by compromise. The central drama of these years was the conflict between the idea of liberty and the reality of slavery. The people of that time were not just statistics. They fought, suffered, hoped. Enslaved Black Americans with songs in their hearts and chains on their hands. White abolitionists with pens, voices, and courage. Politicians with speeches, laws, and desperate efforts to hold the country together. Farmers, soldiers, women. Each was part of this story. America grew, but could not decide what kind of nation it wanted to be. A land of freedom for all, or a land where freedom was a privilege. Each new state, each law, each war was a choice. And by 1860, it was clear compromise no longer worked. The country had split, not just geographically, but morally. This era teaches us that history is not just dates and documents, it is people. Their fears, their hopes, their struggles. And if we want to tell history truthfully, as you do on your channel, we must see not only the politics, but the soul. Thank you for watching and supporting this journey. History comes alive when we explore it together. See you in the next episode.